So before I begin this catch-up discussion for the latest batch of TOG chapters, I'd like to apologise to anybody that was wondering why I haven't made many videos lately. I just finished my 4th year of uni, so it's been pretty stressful and exhausting. I tend to hate creating content when I have a lot on my plate, but now that I'm free for at least a little while, I'll be more consistent with my TOG uploads. I should also note that I won't be covering each chapter in as much detail as I usually would, as that would end up being like an hour-long video. So instead I'll briefly go over the scenes or elements I found to be the most interesting. That means I'll definitely be passing over some great moments in favour of others, so sorry in advance. With that out of the way, let's begin this TOG discussion on chapters 318 through to 323. I think it was pretty obvious to most people, but I was glad that the ancient weapon used by Dorian Frog did actually contain a frog of sorts. Pollock being a divine sea creature makes perfect sense even if frogs technically dwell in fresh water. SAU tends to incorporate all aquatic animals under the umbrella of sea or saltwater life, so I get the feeling that this isn't a translation error. And of course, SAU injects his usual quirkiness into the animal designs with a surprisingly fitting pair of headphones attached to its head. This is probably to prevent itself from being affected by the soundwave blasts, and also because a big-ass frog wearing headphones is just the right amount of absurd for this series. I really love this odd pairing between Dorian Frog and her pet, despite generally getting washed out by Hoquin. Oh, and I will mention White's inability to maintain his power, but I might discuss that in combination with the information from his flashback. It seems the fandom's meme-based theories were proved true about the relationship between Paracool and the similar snarky Green Revolution crew leader. It's likely Pinnacle is a part of the same species at the very least. He's literally Paracool in everything from his appearance to his unadulterated ignorance, as he charges headfirst with his soccer seal partner, Kong, into a suspiciously opened Hell Train door. SAU is clearly loving playing around with the fodder in this arc, as I believe Kong is the first direct reference to the soccer origins of many TOG characters. If you didn't know, SAU mostly uses IRL soccer players to name many of the characters in his manga, so this type of silly costuming was bound to happen at some point. But anyways, it's very clear that a lot of the recruited regulars are likely blindly obeying orders to win favour over the squadron commanders, as Pinnacle comments this superficial statement multiple times when confronted with Karaka. I just wonder if this misplaced trust will backfire on the hierarchy of leadership among the units, and if the train station head will potentially turn the tables on individuals like Calivan or Cheon Ha. The next thing I'd like to discuss is the treatment of Yuri by all units within the Royal Army Forces. According to SAU's blog post for Chapter 318, the Princesses of Zahad supersede any and all authority on the battlefield. What I find intriguing about this world-building detail is not necessarily about the scene itself, but more about the implications for Androssi and Mancini's characters. If you recall with the latter, she led an entire platoon of warships against Ginseng Ha, destroyed most of them, and there's been seemingly no recoil from that event so far. I mean, what does that say about the influence of the royal princesses? It's something that hasn't been considered among the fandom, due to the rather lackadaisical treatment and protection of budding princesses like Androssi. She never felt truly out of reach from our main cast in Season 1, so the idea that she could potentially order squadron commanders to follow her desires is kind of insane. It makes a lot of the interactions between Yuri, Androssi, and Bam feel more treacherous and important than they've ever felt before. For that recontextualization of the princess's organizational influence, SAU's focus on developing this respect for Yuri's orders is really fantastic world and character building. I've also said previously that a Princess War arc is probably incoming, so this detail will definitely have a role to play in the future, especially when considering the ongoing bet between Mancheni and Yuri. I'd also be remiss not to mention the bizarrely comedic clash between Yuri and Karaka. This fight almost felt as if they were both taking the piss out of the Royal Army, getting in the way of different units and spitting back some playful banter. It's weird to say, but Karaka is such a lovable antagonist. Like, I genuinely don't know how anybody could hate this guy, because the blunt humour on display throughout this confrontation is perfection. And if I actually think back to the funniest moments of Season 2 so far, it usually somehow involves a snarky or silly comment from Karaka. He has surprisingly mature outlooks on life, so I got a kick out of him admonishing Yuri's exhausting need to finish their fight. And this also serves to clarify that this rivalry between them will be a continuing plotline throughout the story, which makes sense considering their polar opposite personalities but their similar ambitions. Okay, so we go back to Hokun's role in this arc with a flashback to the days with his malicious father, Erihon, who is pretty evidently disturbed in the mind. But what's interesting is the questions his parenting style, or lack thereof, throws up. Was Hokun's rise as a demonic slayer called White solely a rebellion against his father, or was it part of a parental lineage naturally passed on by his family? My best guess is that he may have initially intended to show positive leadership, but fell back onto his darkest personality traits due to the self-imposed loathing by Erihon's dismissal and the constant confrontations with opponents out for his blood. As he slaughters some of the regulars outside the train, he does mention with an almost serene expression that his main goal is to climb up the tower to slice up his father. So we've got an objective for his character, but it's still unclear what kind of attitude he holds towards his father. Is it resentment, or is it respect? I'm leaning towards resentment, but there's still a possibility that he retrospectively appreciates his father's words in a twisted, parent-surpassing manner. Cheon Hee-ha is such a great addition to the female TOG cast. Perceptive, authoritarian but not unreasonable, and incredibly skilled with her spear called Sylphide. She reminds me of a less cheeky and more cunning Mancheni, which is saying a lot considering she's shown some real long-term planning. I'm not exactly sure how her spear functions, but it appears that it acts almost like observers, just with added functionality such as being able to pierce enemies, block objects, and flip objects. But unfortunately, her coordination of her division was not enough to prevent Hiruin's deception. This arc has really lent itself well to exploring the potential teamwork between Hiruin's Red Witch guidance and Androssi's infinitely usable Bonbon. I've always loved the latter ever since the tool was introduced in the Workshop Battle arc, because it provides Androssi with the speed and flexibility she clearly lacked in Season 1 against Anak. Coming up with a plan to detach the train cars and switch the attention to Rachel's segment was a pretty genius move, without sacrificing the story tension, as Androssi and Evan still had to make quick use of their abilities in tandem to avoid detection. This not only emphasizes how intelligent Hiruin is, but also how dangerous Cheon-ha is. Even if the scene was a bit overcomplicated, I did really enjoy the way SAU portrayed this collaboration, and seeing Androssi all chirpy because she duped Rachel was a nice little additional payback moment. And well, it's time to mention that Drax's colour scheme isn't what I expected after his introduction, which is a bit of a shame. I was honestly a huge fan of his colour gradient present throughout his design, but SAU has instead chosen to go with a more simplistic green tint. Now as for his character, The Lorry vibes are really strong. While we haven't seen enough of him yet, his takedown of Sachi's crew indicates his distinguishing trait may be centered around arrogance due to his ranker status. We don't see how he prevented their escape, but it appears he does not share the same wave controller position as Lorry, which is interesting because I assumed all Eurasia and especially Fonseca family members held similar positions. It's good to see some differentiation among the branches of one of the 10 great families, like we previously did with the Loprobia family and the sub-descendants such as Elaine's Grey Wolf hereditary line. Another little world-building detail I was fond of was that the Ranker prison for Hoquin and Karaka was specially constructed by the workshop. While it is a little bit convenient for the workshop to create anything remotely complicated in the tower, I'm willing to accept it because of how the workshop battle arc showed the intricate web of influence they have in the tower. They are like the biggest tech companies in our world combined, except that they are actually innovative and can actually improve the security and functionality of the tower's levels. They have a real purpose, and that's why they're everywhere. If you didn't realize, this is the first time in the series that a member of the Ari family appears in the story. It's pretty crazy considering they are one of the 10 great families, yet SIU introduces Ari Bright Sharon without any gravitas at all. We don't have much to go on about the traits of their family, but her design seems to be centered around diamonds, with her diamond-shaped hair extensions, diamond-shaped needle, diamond embroidery across her cape, and the yellow 3-horned badge, which is in the general shape of a diamond as well. I imagine the badge that she's wearing is probably the Ari family crest, or a symbol of her command position as a division commander. And I should say, judging from the recent chapter, Elfanion is actually more important than I anticipated. His design is not particularly appealing to me yet, but I feel like I need to understand how his abilities tie into the appearance first. It's going to be interesting to see how he fares against Evankel's fire, considering that he's got this oceanic colour palette to him. Speaking of the command units, there's been a lot of confusion among the fandom about how the squadrons and divisions are organised. This is largely due to Line Webtoon's embarrassing translation efforts, but a Redditor named Dusk Gravity has created a helpful flowchart to clarify these positions in the army hierarchy. I'll leave a link to the Reddit post in the description below if you want to read over this more. Moving on, I initially thought Levy's spells relied on the opponent being unsure of how to answer his questions, but SAU clarified in the blog post that Bam is simply immune to some spells. It is apparently a unique gift of Bam's, similar to his ability to copy skills just by watching the user perform them. This throws up a lot of interesting theories, such as the potential that Bam's body may negate spells, because technically he's a dead child brought back to life. Levy also mentions that Zahad granted him spells to use in his dirty work, which means there's a direct connection with the king. Maybe that's why Bam wasn't influenced by any of Levy's spells, but has been by other users prior to this event. This is so interesting to me because while spells usually require certain conditions to activate, they are generally ambiguous and vaguely defined. This highlights that spells are not like Shinsu, in that they are likely given to a regular rather than naturally possessed. So I wonder if the administrators are the ones who deal out this power, in a similar fashion to the lion turtles from the Avatar The Last Airbender franchise. Let me know your speculations in the comments below, because there's honestly a ton of possibilities. I thought it was also worth mentioning the clever irony in Levy's attacks. He tries to stun Bam with his question mark curse, only for him to be even more confused than Bam. Then he proceeds to use the spell Deathly Blizzard, which forces the enemy to commit suicide, only to end up on the receiving end because of Bam's reverse flow control. The irony was strong throughout this entire clash, and it definitely made Levi a much less serious antagonist to his benefit. I had said previously that he appeared too edgy for my liking, and lo and behold, SAU switches the tables on my perception. I'd love if Levi just keeps appearing against Bam, only to be humorously mocked each time. Now, I didn't cover Karaka's involvement in this batch of chapters too much yet, because the real intrigue comes from chapters 322 and 323. Evankel and Yuhan Sung are sent to the dimensional world that is contained within Karaka's heart, which is separate from his main body of armor. We saw earlier that he can dispose of his body whenever by using his World of Darkness Shinsu ability, but Evan and Yuri halted his retreat. Notably, Karaka and I were confused by Yuri's green slime ability that trapped him. She must have another weapon besides Kranos, Green April, and Black March. But I don't believe it is another Zahad Princess Needle, simply because she would have tried testing it out on the Floor of Death. But I reckon that Ashel Eduardo may have forged another weapon like Kranos. Evan also has a plethora of tools at his disposal, so it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if Yuri possessed way more than 3 weapons. It'll be interesting to see if this weapon has any real significance, and the reason behind why she's hiding it. Also, Evan is admittedly attempting to redirect the assistance of Karaka's allies with what appears to be a piece of his armor. This disrupted the portal, so I imagine his body cannot be transported to the inner world of his heart. Evan's trying to juggle protecting Yuri from Chionhiha and the imprisoned Karaka, but it's clearly going to go awry at some point. While Yuri does mention that Evan had planned this operation to thwart Chionhiha's execution of the regulars, he's still not as long-sighted as Hiran. He can only see the immediate crossroads of the future, not the linear paths of each individual. Hopefully SAE will actually explore this in the future, and show whether the Grey Dwarf's guide abilities have any advantages to them over the Red Witches. From what I can tell, Hiran seems more knowledgeable about the general outcome of character narratives than the specific details of upcoming conflicts, which is why she sometimes gets stuck in doing the plan more so than actually coming up with the plan in the first place. Moving on to the most recent chapter, Evankel completely eviscerates the Nissim family with her signature sun-like orb that literally melts the skin off people and even the plating of Zahad warships. If I recall correctly, I think she's ranked 16 in the tower, so she's one of the strongest characters we've encountered so far, other than Gustang and Older Zahad and Yurik Mazino. Typically, I've found that the less shits a character gives, the more powerful they end up being for some reason. SAU tends to treat overly excited characters as fodder more often than not, with the Infernal Evankel only supporting this assumption. There's also 2 more tidbits I'd like to go over from this scene. The first is that she possesses a very distinct Shinsu orb, eerily similar to Bam's newfound orb control. This feels almost like too obvious foreshadowing, but I get the feeling there might be another mini training arc under Evankel in Season 3. Bam still has not mastered his orb yet, nor really defined it in any meaningful way. What Evankel may lend to Bam's teaching is substance and form, more than the rudimentaries like Kun Edwan focused on. The second detail is the dialogue exchange between the Nissim brothers and Evankel, where they describe an arranged marriage between Kay and a girl from the Yon family. This offhand comment will definitely come back into play after this arc finishes, as Bam and crew are supposed to head towards a meeting with Woon Yeon. There's no way this is just a small background feature of the dialogue. No way. SAU is already starting to set up Season 3's events, and it sounds like Yiwa and the Yeon family are going to be in the spotlight for the first time since the Zygania arc. I've also been liking the subtle progression of Rak's character. I saw this noted in a Reddit thread, but before more recent arcs in the Hell Train saga, he would unabashedly charge anybody who threatened the group instead of following orders. Hwa Yurin makes a reasonable argument for why a regular fighting rankers is usually a 0% success story, but you notice that he doesn't budge at all. He respects Bam's wishes to get Kun out of there safely, which is a nice little development for his character in my opinion. It's also really intriguing that Hiran said his actions, if successful, could rewrite history within the tower. It's been strange, because the Hell Train has been chugging along for hundreds of chapters, but now it's starting to finally feel like we're heading into a closing point. It also seems like Masang is getting a chance to shine after SAU has sidelined her throughout most of Season 2. It's pretty clear now how much Prince's death affected her mentally, but I'm kind of afraid she's going to die a pointless death, contrary to the direction of this chapter. Her new Berserker mode reminds me a ton of Androssi's Fortitude, and it was mentioned that we have no idea what her family lineage is. So if we get her family name somehow, I'm thinking she'll survive. If we don't, she'll probably succumb to the Purple Eye Brothers. There's this overconfidence in the way she speaks about her quick mastery of Shinsu that has me really worried. I'm kind of leaning towards the death flags, as this character development, while appropriate, feels really rushed. If she wasn't going to die, I feel like SAU would usually wait till Season 3's inevitable time skip for her power boost. Obviously, as we are nearing the end of Season 2, there will be casualties, and she seems like a good guess at the moment. As I've said before, Androssi and Wagner probably won't die due to their future story implications, but all the others are fair game. This will be a test of Bam's naive perseverance in the face of dangerous adversity, because I expect Hiran already is aware that Bam's efforts will be fruitless. While his character has grown over the series run, I don't think he'll get away unscathed unless he appreciates the gravitas of the situation. Okay, and I think that's about it for my thoughts on all these chapters. I'm hoping to stick to a bi-weekly schedule release going forward, but please check out my Twitter page for any updates on content. Thanks, and see you next time.